Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, look no further than tullymodels.com, the home of Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply and Steel Mill Modeler Supply. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras, Kevin Tully has you covered with all of the components you'll need to take your grain and steel mills to the next level. Check out the entire catalog at tullymodels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me on today's episode, coming to us from Buffalo, Wyoming, Alex Mantle. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. It's great to be here.
Awesome to have you here on the podcast. And I've been putting some pre-show notes together. And one thing I thought was pretty funny, I'd mention right out the gate, seeing on your pictures there, it made me laugh. You had a special brakeman on your layout in the form of a cat. And boy, was it just perfect because he had his paw right on the turnout control. And boy, that was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was just serendipity right there. My daughter came home from college and she brought a cat.
and the cat's hanging out with you down on the layout. So that's pretty cool. So. Yep. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to, we talk about this big layout that you got. We'll get into that, the Chicago, Denver, and Northern. And you've had a really interesting journey that you told me about, and I'm really excited to share that with our guests. But I want to get started in the beginning. What's your earliest recollections of you in model railroading?
Well, my earliest recollections in model railroading is probably the Lionel train around the Christmas tree. And it was my dad's from the 1950s, and he got it out. I'm a child of the 70s, and he got it out in the 70s. And, we did the thing where you put it around the Christmas tree and make it go about Mach 9, 100,000 times. And then at the end of Christmas, it gets packed up and put away for the next year.
Right.
So that's my earliest recollection of modeling.
That's kind of a familiar story with the Lionel train around the tree. When did you actually get into a little bit more with model railroading after that?
So it had to be in the mid 70s. We did the Christmas tree thing, and I don't know if I pestered my dad enough or if he just realized that I enjoyed trains enough that we kept it up. And we built a kind of a father-son layout. It was 5 by 9 feet. It was particle board back in those days. We did particle board, and then he reinforced it with some 1x3 strips underneath to make it more stout. And you probably know about the old Lionel track, 3 rails and then 3 ties, 1 tie at each end and then a tie in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, my dad hand cut a bunch of ties and then hand stained all these ties to put underneath the track to make it look more realistic. And so we worked on this layout together for quite a while, and he had like that corrugated metal conduit for electrical, and he cut that and made it look like culverts. And this will date me for sure. We had dyed sawdust. It was dyed green sawdust. It's sort of supposed to resemble grass a little bit,
right?
And of course, we had a mountain at one end, and we had a log unloader and a train station that made a whistle noise and that kind of thing. And then my first foray into my own scenery is I wanted a lake, and I must have been about 7 years old. So what does a 7-year-old do? I got out by blue magic marker and I drew a lake right there on the particle board.
Well, humble beginnings, but certainly the idea, of not just having, what some affectionately call a plywood Pacific. You were trying to create scenery, and you had that idea kind of early on.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Let me ask, was there anything prototypical also influencing you? Did you have any, like prototype trains in your area or anything that you were doing rail fanning with?
Not at that time. I think the first prototype railroad that I saw or got involved with was in Alaska. We moved to Alaska, probably about 74. And we were all supposed to live in Anchorage, but my dad ended up getting posted to Fairbanks. So my mom and I lived in Anchorage, and then sometimes we'd ride the train up to Fairbanks. And then sometimes my dad would ride the train from Fairbanks to Anchorage. So that's sort of my first memories of the prototype, riding the rails.
Were you able to bring anything with you when you moved to Alaska? I mean, that's a big change in life. And you talk from going from Northern California to Alaska, quite a change for you as a kid.
Yeah, I was pretty young then. I don't remember if we brought the Lionel trains with us at that point. So the 5x9 layout came actually after Alaska.
Oh, okay. You went to Alaska and then you came back to Northern California?
Correct. Yeah.
So then you have a bigger adventure you had told me about, which took you overseas. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, here we are. This is probably 77. We've got the Lionel 5x9 layout going. And then all of a sudden we're moving across the big pond to London, England. So the company my dad worked for is going to pay for the move and all that. But there was only so much you could take over to England. And we didn't know what our living situation was going to be over there. So the Lionel trains were not coming with us.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah. So we move over there, and this is probably, like I said, 77. And so for Christmas, my dad got a HO scale British rail. It had 3 passenger cars and a diesel electric locomotive. I think it was a class 40 and some track. And so I kind of got back involved with model railroading there. And at the time we lived in an apartment, and so there wasn't a place to set up, anything other than on the tabletop or sometimes on the floor. But then we moved to a suburb of London, Barnes, London, and bought a house and moved in. And up in the attic, I discovered this whole box of 00 scale 00 trains.
Oh, and, nice.
Yeah, some of it was Hornby, and some of it was a company called Triang. And so this 00 scale would run on my HO scale track, and being a kid, I could see the difference in scale on the freight cars and the locomotives. But, when you're a kid, you deal with that kind of stuff. And so the object was it had steel track, and, you had to sand it with 400 grit sandpaper to get it to work for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. So I had that going, and this was in the days before, people really knew about shelf layouts, or at least before I knew about shelf layouts. So I didn't really have a dedicated space for a layout other than in my room, on a desk or on the floor or whatever.
Nice little surprise up in the attic of this new house, and you're able to incorporate that with your new set. I understand, that railroading in the UK, we've had several guests on that, talk about the differences, but was there any influence over there either as far as seeing trains? I mean, you rode trains in Alaska, but anything that kind of stuck out to you prototype wise over in England?
Oh, yeah. So, of course, we rode the London Underground, the tube, all over the place. But then I mentioned we lived in Barnes, and there was this common, and right across from the common was the Barnes rail station. So I would ride my bicycle over there and go hang out and watch passenger trains.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So it was just a short 15-minute ride, and I could go rail fan over there.
Now, what age were you when you ended up in London?
This would have been 9, 10, and 11, or 8, 9, and 10, somewhere in there.
Okay. How long were you over there?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a neat life story. I'd be able to say that you've been lived in England, lived in a bunch of places, obviously, between Northern California, then Alaska, and then obviously London, England. That's really neat. Bring us back to California when you move back, and where does the model railroad journey go from there?
So from there, yeah, we moved back to Northern California, and we brought some of the British stuff with us, but we didn't the old Triang stuff that barely ran. We didn't bring that home with us. Just
Yeah.
the better stuff. Like I had a Hornby Intercity 125, which was a passenger train set. So we brought that stuff home. And then I had a neighbor friend who was getting out of HO scale. He was getting into N scale. So he gave me all his old HO scale stuff. And there was an Atlas, I want to say GP40 decorated as a Santa Fe locomotive. And he had some freight cars. I think most of them were Tyco, but whatever.
Yeah.
So from there, I got a 4x8 sheet of plywood and started building the layout by myself. And can't remember if my dad helped a whole bunch on that, probably getting the plywood and setting it up and that kind of thing. Here I had this mishmash of equipment, this British stuff and this American stuff. But I was bound and determined I was going to build a layout.
Yeah.
I had a mountain on one end. I made a paper mache mountain over chicken wire and had a town on the other end. And, for me, the joy was getting the equipment to run. If I could get it to run reliably, then I was having fun. It didn't, at that point in my life, it didn't bother me that it was just going around in a circle. And you're learning soldering skills and you're learning scenery skills and a little bit of carpentry and, things that will help you later in life on, lots of different household projects or bigger, better model train layout.
What was influencing you at that time as far as, were you experimenting? Were you reading articles, magazines, that kind of stuff? Where were you getting your information from as you were working on your 4x8 layout?
I had a couple older issues of Model Railroader and Railroad Model Craftsman. And there was a club layout in a town next to us. And we'd go over there maybe a couple times a year and check it out. I wasn't a member or anything, but we'd watch that layout. So that's kind of where my influences were coming from.
Yeah. How'd you get involved with the club?
They had an open house and had it advertised in the newspaper or something like that.
Is that club still around? Do you know?
I believe it is. It's the Mount Diablo Model Railroad Club.
Oh, excellent. Very good. So where do we go from there? We remember, doing influenced by a club, working on your 4x8 layout. I believe you said you stayed interested pretty much through middle school. Was that what you were working on that entire time?
Yeah. So, mostly in the winters. In the summer, I was kind of an outside kid. But yeah, I was working on that 4x8 all the way through middle school. And then, took the usual break when you get to high school, other interests and fast cars and that kind of thing.
Right.
And then we ended up moving again, believe it or not. We moved to Alabama, and I didn't take any of my railroad stuff with me, but I got interested in building like plastic model car kits. I think I had a Chevy Nova and a Chevelle and a K10 pickup and that kind of thing. So I was still modeling, even if it wasn't railroad related.
Yeah, and I think that kind of, helps hone skills too, even if it's not model railroad related, still some of the same processes and helps you prepare for, future builds and what you were looking to do in the future potentially.
Oh, absolutely. Gluing stuff together and trying to hide the seams and painting things. I didn't have an airbrush back then, so everything was brush painted, but still, you try to lay that paint down so that it's nice and smooth. So making things look realistic. I didn't really know much about weathering back then, but at least I wanted stuff to look mostly real and more what I saw in the real world, not the souped up stuff that you saw on the box cover, but what you would see in the real world.
Yeah, a little bit of prototype car building, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we get that we're down in Alabama, we're building model cars, and then when does model railroading start to re-enter the picture for you?
So I ended up going to college in Wyoming, the University of Wyoming in Laramie. And I had this apartment and it was 9 blocks from the Union Pacific main line. So I would take my bicycle or I'd walk down to the main line, and there was a welded rail facility down there. I think it's still there. And they had this great footbridge over the tracks. So I could go and you could go watch trains or go watch the welded rail come out of the facility. And so I'd ride my bike along the main line and just go train watching for a while.
Well, that's an awesome place to be.
Yeah. And then one day, I'm not even sure where in Laramie this was, but I came across this old SD7 decorated in Burlington Northern paint. And it turns out it was owned by the Wyoming and Colorado Railroad. And there it is, sitting on a siding, idling, hooked up to an F unit. I don't remember if it was an F3 or an F7. And I found out much later that this SD7 was a former CB&Q locomotive. I think the Wyoming and Colorado is all but defunct now. I think they still operate a little bit in Oregon, but not in Wyoming anymore. So anyway, I really got interested in some prototype railroading. And then one day I was in a bookstore in downtown Laramie, and I was walking past the magazine rack. And so this was like late 1995. And I came across the Great Model Railroads 1996 volume and the November issue of Model Railroader. I remember being amazed. I had no idea that there's that level of detail that people were putting into model railroads. And I just wore the covers off of those. And then the production values, of course, of the hobby press back then was just phenomenal and was unlike anything I'd seen from the old hand-me-down model railroaders I had in my youth.
Right.
And then I discovered two hobby shops in Laramie. One was kind of a general hobby shop, and the other one was part-time, but it was rail related. And so then I got really interested in modeling again. And I bought a few freight cars, and I bought a few Craftsman kits. I bought a Campbell Scale Models truss bridge and the Campbell Scale Models. I think it was the Montgomery Feed and Seed. Started putting kits together. And, I bought an airbrush, and I'd never airbrushed before. I kind of taught myself how to airbrush. And of course, being in an apartment, it was a studio apartment by myself. I didn't have a paint booth. So what I did is I went into the bathroom and I turned on the exhaust fan and opened up the window and lined the bathtub with old newspapers. And there you go. I had a paint booth.
Here's how you not get your deposit back from an apartment rental, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. You'd say a little studio apartment, and you're diving right into this, right back into the model railroading hobby, inspired by some prototype railroading that you see in a great spot with the UP, and being able to witness the short line and inspired by all of that. You're doing all this other stuff, but were you able to build at least something to run the locomotives on in that studio apartment?
I was. So yeah, I was studying track plans, and I really got into John Armstrong's track planning for realistic operations. And I was drawing track plans. I had this big artist pad. It was old school, paper, pencil, protractor, and straight edge. So I was drawing, fairly ambitious track plans, but I knew I couldn't do that in a little studio apartment. So I found this L-shaped track plan. I thought, well, I could build that. So I had this L-shaped track plan basically divided into 3 modules that could come apart, and I would shove them underneath my bed when I wasn't working on them. And then when I wanted to work on them, I would get it on the kitchen table or the coffee table, and I'd work on this little L-shaped switching layout. And I saved some money, and I purchased, it was back then, it was Lifelike Proto 2000 SD7. And man, it was the smoothest locomotive I had ever had. It was amazing.
A far cry from that old English 00 scale stuff, huh?
Right. But then you look to see what we have now, and that was a far cry from the SD7 that I had 30 years ago.
True.
But anyway, it was enough to really spark my interest and start thinking about things that could be bigger or better.
So how long are you in that studio apartment for?
I was there for 3 years, and I never got the layout into a scenic stage, but I got it where the track, install the track, and it was electrically sound, and I could run a train and do a little bit of switching. And so I was doing that and building kits and structures and that kind of stuff.
Now, when you move, where are you heading to from there?
From there, I head up to Buffalo, Wyoming, which is where I live now. My wife and I had a small 2-bedroom house, and I had used the spare bedroom for a layout. And it was a little bit like a shelf layout. It went around three walls of the room. But it was a little deeper than most people think of shelf layouts. I think it was 24 inches deep rather than like 18 or less. And again, I never got it to scenery stage, but I got the track installed and wired, and I could run some trains, and was still building a lot of freight car kits. And about that time, I discovered a magazine called Rail Model Journal, and the production values weren't as good as, say, Model Railroader or Model Railroad Craftsman, but the information in it was amazing to me, and I really got interested in prototype railroading, and specifically, freight cars and choosing a prototype. And at that time, I convinced myself that I wanted to be a Great Northern modeler, and Great Northern and Northern Pacific and Western Montana. So I had track plans and was dreaming, and I kept coming back to, this doesn't seem like enough switching for me, and it doesn't seem like enough on rail traffic. It seemed like a lot of lumber. And I thought, well, to really do this scenery right, I think I would need to go to N scale. And I just wasn't comfortable working in N scale because I'd always worked in HO scale. I know some people can make a change fairly easily, but I wasn't one of those guys. I pretty much started in HO scale, and that's just where I'm comfortable. So anyway, at that point, I started to abandon the idea of the Great Northern, basically because it wasn't running the traffic that I wanted to run, and the scenery wasn't quite right.
Before I let you continue here, I got to ask, what got you from, this whole idea of you had the 4x8, and then, you talked about the L-shaped one, which sounds like it was switching. Where did that whole operations thing get introduced to you?
It was through the hobby press, the track planning books, and, reading Tony Custer's articles and studying the Virginia and Ohio, Allen McClellan's railroad, and just really wanting a model railroad to have a purpose. And I think that developed early on in those college years and it was quick too. I realized that a 4x8 wasn't going to do it, that I really wanted a railroad with a purpose and a direction.
Yeah. And I think that, it's kind of an unscientific study, but through the interviews that I've had here, and as I hear people tell their story, when they discover operations, it's really that pivot point where their model railroading enthusiasm just takes this, massive upturn, talking 55, 60 degree incline of interest. And it just seems to take off from there when they find their railroad has a purpose, and, they can do more than just watch it go around. Now they can build scenery and actually operate it and do all those things all in one. Certainly seems to be a huge catalyst. And it seemed like the same for you.
Yeah, for sure. So it was about that time I became really interested in prairie railroading, like Granger lines and railroads that would haul agricultural products, and specifically in the Midwest. So my wife and I moved to our current home, and that was 25 years ago almost. We did a remodel, and I built a room, a 37 by 35 foot model railroad room.
A big railroad room.
It was, yeah. And it was a bit overwhelming because I thought I knew what I wanted to do, but then I have this huge space, and I thought, well, wait a minute, I don't know what I want to do. So at that time, I was really interested in the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, and the Wabash and the GM&O through Missouri. But I couldn't pick a prototype. So that's when I dove off into the land of freelance, and now I have a railroad of lies.
Well, I think you have a railroad where, I'm again through interviewing folks on the show and talking to them. And of course the influence of Chris Palmieri and, home shops. And, he really kind of got me introduced to the freelance world, and then talking to several others. I don't think it's just a railroad of lies. It's just a railroad of, of a deep passion to include all the things you love. And, that doesn't have to be stapled down to just one railroad. You can bring all of those great things into a railroad. And so I'm wildly fascinated by freelance. I really am.
Yeah, for sure. And part of it is my personality. I think if I chose to model the CB and Q, I think I would overanalyze everything to death, and, really try and plan it down to the last foot of getting the track right. Whereas if I have the Chicago, Denver, Northern, which is my freelance layout, then I can emulate the traffic and emulate a time period that I want, and not overanalyze everything, and actually get busy and build something.
Yeah, that's for sure. It doesn't, you don't feel obligated to follow the prototype to the exact amount. You can kind of ebb and flow your story to make it work for you. And like you said, yeah, I get that, because you want to get it exactly right if you're trying to master somebody else's, or a prototype railroad, but you still have to have a story to sell. And I'm sure that was, quite a challenge for you to come up with that story for your freelance railroad.
Yeah, I don't have an elaborate backstory. Just the Chicago, Denver, and Northern, was born in the 1880s, like so many other railroads in the Midwest that were looking west for increased traffic and revenues. So my railroad is basically, picture a Y, and one axis goes to Chicago and the other axis goes to St. Louis, and then the tail goes to Denver. And so we were just another Western railroad looking for markets and traffic. So I conceived it and with all these points, but I don't model that whole 1,000 miles of stretch. I just model about 135 of it.
Well, the name certainly is one that sells a real railroad. Chicago, Denver, Northern seems like a railroad that would really exist, and, great name, and obviously a great area, something that was influential to you. What, when you started designing this, and you've got, man, it's such a big room. This is really impressive. You've gone from, some shelf layouts right to the big deal here.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you knew you had to incorporate into the Chicago, Denver, and Northern?
Well, like I said, I really got interested in prairie railroading. I wanted to have some bridge line traffic, which would be auto parts out of Michigan and Indiana going to Kansas City. But I wanted to have some online traffic as well, like grain and lumber. I wanted to have some petroleum coming out of Oklahoma and Texas going east. I wanted to have some produce coming out of California going east. So it was sort of this combination of bridge line traffic as well as some online traffic. And I've got a furniture factory on my layout, and so we receive a lot of lumber, and we receive fabric and leather and paint and adhesives, and we ship a lot of furniture.
So you got a lot going on. Of course, a big room and a lot of layout to cover. When did this all start? Put a year on this when you started to put some bench work down.
So this would have probably been 2003. So what's that, 21 years ago?
Wow.
Yep. So I feel like I should be further along than I am, but I had a couple false starts. And of course, I had a young family at the time, and I pretty much got into the mode of I'll model in the winter and do fun stuff with the family and outdoorsy stuff in the summer.
Sure.
So progress was slow. And like I said, I had a couple false starts.
Yeah, talk about those false starts, because I think in false starts there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So why don't you share that with us?
Sure. So I at the time, I hadn't heard of the TOMA approach, the one module approach, but that's sort of what I was doing. I thought I'd build a 20-foot section and then build another 20-foot section, from bench work to track work to scenery, and kind of complete as I go. But I wasn't happy with my first section. That the track alignment wasn't right. The construction quality wasn't right. I was having some derailments. So I thought I better start over right now rather than try and live with some of this stuff. So I kind of ripped it out and I redesigned it, and I forged ahead and rebuilt that 20-foot section and got it scenic and operational.
What were some of the things that what helped you improve there? And you talk about some track misalignments and whatnot. What were the steps? What were the things that you went back and refocused on to learn and make that better?
Well, I did get it to the point where I could kind of operate this 20-foot section, and I didn't have the turnouts located in a good spot. I wasn't selectively compressing enough, which is kind of an odd statement, I think. So I had to selectively compress more to sort of make it more realistic to operate. And then some of the construction, I was doing a spline roadbed, and I'd never done that before, and I didn't have it completely level, and you really got to have that stuff dialed in. So I use spline now, and I have it pretty dialed in. But it was just making those early construction errors is how you learn.
Right.
And being in Wyoming, our population is pretty slim. So I live in Buffalo, and I like to say the elevation is greater than the population. Our elevation is 4,700 feet, and our population is 4,600.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So there wasn't a whole lot of other modelers in the area that I could lean on for expertise and guidance. So I was just kind of figuring all this stuff out as I went.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you're kind of on a, in a not so populated area. Your resources are probably fairly thin. Do you have like a local hobby shop or anything that's in that area near Buffalo?
No, there used to be a hobby shop up in Billings, Montana, but they closed down. And when I lived in Laramie, I used to go to Caboose Hobbies in Denver quite a bit. That was fun, but they've since closed down. But as far as where I live now, no, everything's through the internet.
And even early on, I'm thinking, if you started 20 something years ago, there was some, I guess, e-commerce, but it wasn't the e-commerce of today. So where were you getting supplies and materials and all the things that you needed for your model railroading projects?
Oh, there was a company called Standard Hobby Supply. And in the days before internet, you did mail order, and you'd fill out the order form and put it in an envelope and send it off to New Jersey. And 2 weeks later, a big box full of stuff came.
But yeah, you're kind of on your own. You're using magazines and articles and, all that other information to build it. And, kind of pre-internet. I mean, maybe you had a little bit of internet, to kind of get some information, but it certainly isn't what you had today. So a lot of trial and error to learn.
Right. Trial and error. And then as far as the prototype, I joined some historical societies. I was a member of the Great Northern Historical Society, and I'm still a member today of the Burlington Route, the CB&Q Historical Society, and the GM&O Historical Society, so that I could really tap into prototype information. And then I had the hobby press, Model Railroader and Railroad Model Journal, that I would just devour them and try and learn as much as I could from the articles.
Yeah, you're not the first person I've heard talk about historical societies and how much they've helped them with their model railroading. I just think that's a really neat concept. You think you would join them if you were really more into the prototype, but boy, they have a great influence on model railroading.
Oh, they really did.
So a couple false starts, and you're heading in this, that you're using this, the TOMA approach to build this. And where did you get that concept from?
I don't even know, because I hadn't heard of the TOMA approach when I started that back in the day. But I after I got that 20-foot section rebuilt, I decided that's really not the best approach for me. Yeah. That I really needed to concentrate and get more bench work built and more track built before I started scenicking stuff.
Yeah, I think the TOMA is a great concept. I guess you got to look at it. There's a couple different ways to look at it. And, I've heard others say that it works great for them. And I think for me, it may be a little difficult unless you could operate just in that 20-foot section like you described. But you almost need that ability to run something just to keep the flywheel turning, right? Just that, to get that gratification that, hey, listen, and it's not like I'm going to have to wait a long time to be able to connect this together or be able to run trains, at a decent clip here or a decent amount. So I can see positives and negatives to it for sure. And I think for me, I got to have that gratification of being able to turn the power on and be able to run a train, even if it's in just a short section, to be able to do a little bit of switching at least one industry.
Right. Yeah. So, and after I did that, the 20-foot section, I built a staging yard, because I figured that would help me be more excited about operating this 20-foot section if I could have a place where trains came from and departed to. So that helped. So my staging yard was 11 track staging yard, about 33 feet long.
Wow. Big stuff here.
Yeah.
You've gone from small to right to big. There's no real medium for you, was there, Alex?
No, there wasn't. Go big or go home.
Yeah. Big. Yeah. That no kidding. Full speed or nothing, or go big, go home. That's you right there. So you're starting to get some track laid down. You build a staging yard and this. As you had this track plan drawn up, how many revisions of this track plan did you have as over the last 20 some odd years of building your layout?
So when we remodeled the house and built the train room, I thought I needed to get away from paper and pencil. So I bought some software, some track planning software, and I really enjoyed that. And so I probably have about 30 revisions because it's just so easy to do on like a CAD based program.
Yeah.
So probably 30 revisions.
Anywhere you had to take track up, rechange it, any of those kinds of things?
Well, yeah, actually just recently, about 6 months ago, I moved my staging yard because it wasn't in the right spot. So that took about 2.5 months to completely do that.
I jokingly say if you paint your track that while it's laid down on the bench work and then you move it, it leaves that shadow of the former track.
Yeah.
And I say that's the mark of a true railroader, model railroader, at least, that, you see those shadows, you see the changes. It's like, oh, that didn't work. I don't really like this. And it's constantly like an ebb and flow kind of, changes and making it work for you as you go along.
Right. Yeah. So I got the staging yard moved, and then I didn't like the wiring, and the wiring worked. There was no problem with it working, but it wasn't neat and tidy, and that was driving me nuts. So I had to redo the wiring and make it neat and tidy.
Right.
So I've got this, 30 some odd revisions. And part of that is because of the lack of other railroads in the area. Every railroad I've seen up until a few years ago was through the hobby press or on the YouTube or something like that. So last spring of 23, I went to the Thousand Lake region, the Twin Cities division NMRA meet, which was fantastic. They had like 3 days of layout tours. I saw more layouts in those 3 days than I'd seen in my entire life. And
wow.
that was phenomenal.
Awesome. Who'd you get to meet out there? Did you get to spend some time with Tom Gaisher and Ken Zeska and all our friends over there?
Those guys and Dave Hamilton. Had a great time.
That's a great region. That really is. They do a lot of great stuff, and their getaways and everything else. They're doing a phenomenal job.
Yeah. At first they were like, well, you're from Wyoming. What are you doing here? But that lasted 5 minutes. And those guys are so welcoming. It was a great experience.
Yeah, there's some really great regions and divisions out there, that's for sure. And they are certainly one of them. And that's awesome. A guy from Wyoming travels. Because I imagine there isn't a whole lot going on for your region or division. Is there out there in Wyoming?
Not a whole lot. I think we have 20 members currently. And our region stretches from like Rapid City, South Dakota, and goes west to Cody, Wyoming. And then I want to say south to Cheyenne, Wyoming. So it's a huge area.
That's hard to pick a place to have a meeting. It's a lot of real estate being covered by that division.
Right.
So tell us a little bit more about the progress that you've made on this, the layout. What's its current status? Let's start there. Where are we at?
It's probably 65% complete on bench work and track work, and 10% on scenery, just because I still have that 120-foot section that's scenic and, pretty much done except for the minor details. So, my daughters are mostly grown, one's in college and the others in the last years of high school. So my family time is significantly less because they're doing their own thing, which is great. So I've been able to spend more time in the train room. I did go through a period about 5 or 6 years ago where I just kind of hit the model railroad doldrums, and I wasn't interested in coming in the train room and just kind of had lost my modeling mojo. So I regained that about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And now I'm in the train room almost every day, even if it's just for an hour. Most of the time it's an hour and a half at night after work, and, more time on the weekends, especially in the winter.
What resparked it for you?
That's a great question. I'm not exactly sure what resparked it.
And sometimes it'll be just as simple as watching a train go by somewhere, or, just funny that what will get somebody sparked up. Of course, spending time with other model railroaders definitely helps. I went out to Opsia Drop in Syracuse not too long ago, and you come back all fired up. And I'm sure you felt that way coming out of the Twin Cities division too, like, oh, now I'm ready to go again. Yeah. But yeah. Sometimes it just takes a little bit to reignite the flame.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, there was a podcast, and it was a father and son. I want to say Todd Wiley. Anyway, they
Okay.
were just basically building models and broadcasting their conversations while they were building models.
Yeah.
And I think that's what sparked it. And that was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, we Wiley scale modeling is what you're talking
Yeah.
about. And
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
a great podcast, been out for a long time. And boy, they have a lot of fun conversations, good father son banter at times. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really, really good podcast.
So
So
I stumbled across that on my Spotify feed, and I think that was kind of what got me back interested. And man, it's been nonstop since.
well, that's awesome. That's awesome. So you said it's about 60% of where you're at. What are your ultimate goals for your layout? Like, what do you envision, when you have more track laid? And uh, I know you said you're kind of like out on your own. Are you gonna, you thinking about operating sessions? Are you thinking it's just going to be kind of you, or what are your hopes and thoughts with your layout?
So I really want to have operating sessions, and I'm sort of a lone wolf, but not by choice, just by geography,
Yeah.
if you will. But I want to be able to have operating sessions where we have people over, and if I had finished product or something like that, where I could have 5 to 6 guys, maybe 8, come over and operate, that would be great.
Yeah.
But I've also got the railroad design that if I want to operate, a small section by myself and spend a couple hours in the evening doing some switching or running a local, that I could do that as well. But I keep coming back to, if I build it, they will come, because that really is my ultimate goal, is to have an operating model railroad that's fun and enjoyable for myself to operate, but have others over.
I have this vision, just this thought that when I drive around, and I do a lot of travel within New England and driving through communities and neighborhoods, and that there's far more model railroads than we'll ever know about. Like there's these guys that are out there, and something tells me somewhere, even though it's a small population, that there's other guys in Buffalo, Wyoming that would love, that are maybe even model railroaders and haven't even come out because they're just ordering their stuff online. And
Right.
I just have that feeling that there's far more than we'll ever know about. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to find those folks too and have that come to fruition, because you're putting in a lot of layout, and you definitely want to be able to share it. But more important, you've made that thought of, how can I run this by myself and still be able to enjoy my layout, even if I don't have a crew over here, which is a very important concept.
Right. Yeah. So another little tidbit here is I have only recently operated on somebody else's model railroad. So here I'm building this huge layout for operations, and just a month and a half ago, I went and operated on somebody else's layout and had an absolute ball. So
tell us about it. Where'd you go?
So his name's Mark Pruitt, and he's got the CB&Q in Wyoming, and that his railroad's, or he lives in Casper, Wyoming, which is about 110 miles south of me. And so he's got only steam, which is a little bit odd for me because I'm only diesel. And,
Yeah.
He's kind of tongue in cheek that, a diesel locomotive will never run on his railroad. So he's prototype modeling. He's got the CB&Q and the Chicago and Northwestern in Casper and around Wyoming. And I think it's set in like the early 40s pre-war. And so, and it's probably, I think he's got his track work about 90% complete. Scenery is just about 20% complete, maybe. So the next operating session's in June.
Well, that's great. And yeah, I think a lot of takeaways. What were your takeaways from operating at his layout? Were there anything that you took from there that said, I think I could apply this to what I'm doing here? Was there any of that?
No, because he's just getting started. So it was an operating session / shakedown session.
Okay.
He was using computer generated switch lists, and actually I'd rather do car cards and waybills and that kind of thing. I just think that fits my personality a little bit better.
Well, that's a takeaway there. I mean,
Sure.
Sometimes it's not only just, what you want to do, but things you decide, that wasn't for me, and I've been on operating sessions that are like that too. Like, I learned from operating at a place where they were using their cell phones. Like, I don't like using my cell phone to operate. I want to throttle, those kinds of things are definitely good takeaways, even if they're not, maybe the negatives, but they're a good takeaway nonetheless.
Yeah, he did run short of throttles, so some of us were using our cell phone, and that's a little
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see the value of it. You know, you don't have to buy as many throttles. And I guess it's more of a personal thing for me where I like to be able to put my cell phone away unless I'm taking a picture. I'd like to like not be connected with the world
Right.
and like lose myself into a layout. And if you have your phone on and, you know, the next thing you know, a text comes up or an email comes up, now you're being pulled away from, you know, the experience of slipping back into, you know, the era of the layout or whatnot, because now you're, it's an obvious distraction. But I could definitely see the validity of for folks that need extra throttles, and especially big layouts like yours, where if you're going to have a bunch of operators, you know, to have all those throttles is quite an expense.
Right. Right. But I like your idea of being disconnected. I mean, because for me, being in the train room and modeling is my way to disconnect from the world that is and connect to the world that I wish it was.
Right. Right. It's an escape.
Exactly.
Just like any of the hobby is an escape, being able to just, you know, leave the world behind and, you know, go into whatever era and lose yourself and the day's stresses and everything. That's why even at hobby shops, I feel the same way. Like I go into a hobby shop, I don't want to hear politics. I don't want to talk about the day's events. I just really want to just slip away.
Exactly. Yeah. For sure.
Well, that's good. At least you got, you know, I mean, 110 miles isn't no, you know, drive down the street, but, you know, you do have some connections in that area and hopefully that fills in. I guess the, you know, the pros and cons of living in, you know, in beautiful Wyoming, right, where you have lots of, you know, beautiful scenery and country, but trying to find model railroaders. But again, I think you network yourself out there enough, you'll be absolutely amazed. And you got some pretty neat stuff going on. I definitely checked out your Instagram page where you were sharing photos that you have and doing a really nice job there. And then you've got some videos as well. And you did some really nice videos to share on your YouTube channel, although they're a little thin and I think maybe you may have moved away from it a little bit, but there's certainly a lot of good content there to check out.
Yeah, I was mostly posting on YouTube for my family because my side of the family lives in California still, and my wife's side of the family's from the South. So it's a way for them to connect and see my progress. So yeah, the videos have gotten a little thin, but I still post on Instagram mostly regularly.
As you've been learning, I gotta ask you, what's your right now your favorite part of building your layout?
I think it's the artistic release. And you know what one of your guests said that art is a form of protest. So that's my form of protest is my model railroad, protesting against the march of time.
Right. Yeah. What era is your layout? And then, I don't know if we covered that or not.
No, 1962. So I model August of 1962.
And what was the reason for selecting August 1962?
Because I really like first generation diesels, but I also really like the GP30, which, you know, most people argue is the first of the second generation EMD diesels. So to pull that off and not have to model any steam, 1962 seemed like the perfect year. because I would have lots of first gen diesels and just a few GP30s.
I find it fascinating when you're able to narrow down right to, and I know there's some modelers out there that can narrow down and they run their layout within like 2 days. Like it's either, you know, whatever it is, August 14th, 1962 or August 15th, 1962. And that's the only 2 days that they run on their layout. It's just, it's neat, but I get it. It's just a neat concept. It you know, kind of like it adds to the simulation. And then also, I guess for you, it kind of, you know, it's like a limiter, right? Where you say, okay, well, that wasn't in 1962, so I don't have to do it, or I don't, you know, I guess it's maybe protects your wallet a little bit and kind of keeps you drilled in and focused on what your layout is going to be.
Yeah, it keeps it real for me. And it does, you know, it keeps me disciplined. As far as just the whole concept, because I remember as a kid, I seen the V&O, Alan McClellan's V&O. I for years thought that was a real railroad, and it wasn't.
I think a lot of us did.
Yeah.
That didn't work in the end. Yeah.
And you know, to me, that's the ultimate compliment right there. And I've had
Sure.
non-railroad friends, say, yeah, I think this is real, right? Nope. It's all made up. It's a railroad of lies. So
Yeah.
that's the ultimate compliment.
Yeah, for sure. And we've heard that before. And yeah, I've looked up several of them, even guys, that are like John Parker, the BNSF Fall River division. It's like, okay, where is the Fall River division? And you start looking, it's like, it doesn't exist. It's something he created, and he used the Class 1 to do it. But it's really neat. That is the ultimate compliment for a freelance model railroader, like you said, to be able to be completely fooled by them and think that it's a real railroad. And that's great. You've been able to do that with a great name. Like I said, Chicago, Denver, and Northern. That's a fantastic name. It is very railroadish. It sounds very much a good historical name. Yeah,
for sure. So, and the other thing about 1962, August of 1962, is I can model like produce coming out of California. I can remodel the very beginning of the grain rush, getting boxcars placed and grain doors shipped to elevators, getting ready for the fall harvest. The other thing about 1962 is I really like boxcars, and everything was shipped in boxcars. Grain was shipped in boxcars. Cowhide was shipped in boxcars. Agricultural products shipped in boxcars. And, this may get me kicked off, but I don't really love the covered hoppers.
That's quite all right. Everybody's got a thrill and a love. So long as you like 50-foot high cubes, we'll be fine. But no, it's great. It's, you found just a passion for all of these things and building your freelance model railroad and building the story to what you like and including all those things. It's really cool. I asked you earlier about, what your favorite part of the hobby is and what you like doing. What do you find the most challenging?
Painting all my locomotives into my home road scheme. I really enjoy painting and weathering and decaling, but I mean, it's definitely a challenge to keep the stripes straight and, make sure your lines aren't fuzzy and get the decals just right.
Where'd you come up with the scheme for your locomotives?
It came, so on the cover of 1996 Great Model Railroads by Kalmbach, was Dick Elwell's Hoosick Valley lines. In one of his pages, he had the Adirondack and Northern. Is that how you say that? In
Adirondack and Northern, yeah.
Yes, thank you. And the paint was red and gray, and all I did was switch the red to green. So that's where I stole that paint scheme from.
A vast majority of the percentage of art is stealing, right? 80-90% of art is stealing, something like that.
That's right. So yeah. And then I read lots of articles from I think Tony Custer, and he was always saying keep it real. And there were only so many graphic designers at EMD or Alco, so that a lot of railroads had very similar looking schemes, just changed in colors, or you change a stripe width or something like that.
Yeah, and they weren't doing anything overly fancy there. They weren't blending a lot of things. It was very much, solid color and stripes and that kind of thing. And then you, who's doing your decal? How'd you do your graphic art for your decals? How'd that come about?
Way back 30 years ago, there was a guy in Wisconsin, Don Manlick, and he came up with some decals for me. And then, unfortunately, he passed away several years ago, and I ran out of decals. So I contacted Highball Graphics, and I said, "Hey, here's what Don did for me years ago. Can you kind of reproduce this?" And he said, "Heck yeah!" And so now I got a fresh lifetime supply of decals from Highball Graphics.
Awesome, good stuff. Jim's a great guy, and certainly helped me with some projects. And glad that he was able to help you with yours. And always good to be able to continue on your paint scheme. You didn't have to make any changes because of that. You're able to keep everything moving forward. And so that's awesome. So as we wrap this up, I want to ask one last question here. Tell us what's next for your railroad. What's the next big project you're working on, and what's going on with it?
I've got a truss bridge scene that I'm working on. And I just finished building a truss bridge, and I tried a new technique, the chipping medium from, I think, Vallejo. And so that really amazed me. It came out really, really well. It really looks good. Did some rust effects underneath the paint and chipped it off, and it looks fairly realistic. But so I have to get this scene finished, and then there's going to be like a cornfield that goes underneath the bridge and a little stream. And so once I get that connected, then I can get back into some operating sessions, because that scene comes out of my staging yard going west. So right now, all traffic to the west is cut off, waiting for this truss bridge to get completed.
Awesome stuff. Well, Alex, it was a thrill having you here on Around the Layout to hear about your Chicago, Denver, and Northern layout. I look forward to getting some more updates from you as you update your layout. We'll get you back on the show, get to hear about what's happening on your layout. But until then, thanks for stopping by.
It was great. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.